Welcome, everyone. Today, I am super excited since we have our first guest speaker in our Facebook group. Today, we will have David K. Richards, who is not just a guest, he's also a dear friend and a coach who has been inspiring me for years. So, who is David? David is an intuitive and visionary leader who helps change makers usher in new paradigms for learning and leadership. He's a current founder and CEO of Changemaker Schools, a network of micro schools. He's also founder and CEO of Pathfinder, a program to help others open schools. In addition, David is a speaker and leadership coach and leads a mastermind program called The Wise Warrior. He also runs a podcast called Changemaker EDU, where I got to be a participant. He has worked in education reform for over 25 years as a teacher, principal, and founder of several innovative charter schools with the nationally recognized Summit Public Schools and the school he started, the Growth Public School. David has dedicated his life to helping people of all ages connect with the powerful, intuitive leader within themselves. David lives in Sacramento, California, with his wife, Julie, and his two children, Kyle and Ella. He holds a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley and a master's degree from Stanford University. So welcome, David. We're so happy to see you. So I'm already tired just listening to everything you've done, even though I kind of know your life, but it's pretty insane and very impressive. So I think we should probably start out even before we started talking about your life in education, because I find that very, very interesting that you did not start out in this the education field. You started out in financing, corporate world. How did this all happen, and what changed it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's so great to be with you, both of you. Well, so I studied history in college, and I actually started in community college. I went to community college for 5 years, and that was because my public high school experience and my school experience in general was like pretty bad. And so I redid high school and then went to college basically. But when I graduated, I really wanted to teach. And so I taught Spanish part-time. You didn't need a certification. So I just did it right out of college. And it was so hard. It was incredibly hard. And being, first one in my family to go to college, growing up in poverty, I was just really overwhelmed by making $20 an hour to teach kids Spanish. And it just felt like, what am I doing here? I have this Berkeley degree. So I ended up going in the opposite direction because I've always been kind of balancing the entrepreneurialism and my service side. And so I went straight into corporate banking because I put myself through college by being a bank teller. So I worked for Wells Fargo for years, and I couldn't get any job other than banking, right? Because it was like the resume, you get stuck on the resume. It's like, okay, no one would call me back unless it was a bank. So my wife is in graduate school in Washington, D.C., and I was working in 2 blocks from the White House at a bank that every single president had an account at. So it was this very prestigious institution. And I ended up working there in corporate institutional banking, three-piece suit, everything. I went from teaching Spanish to doing that like all in 3 months. And it was really, really fascinating. And then one day I was walking home from the bank going to the metro stop, and I felt like I had to go into the Borders. Remember when they used to have bookstores on the corner, right? So I went into the Borders, and I found this book by Martha Beck. So if you've heard of Martha Beck, she's kind of like the OG of life coaches. And she has a book, she's multiple books, but the one back then in the late 90s was called Finding Your Own North Star. And I was physically ill. Like I was leaving the bank and I just felt like I could vomit. I just knew that this was not my life path. And so I picked up this book and sat on the floor and read the whole entire thing word for word and put down the book and said, I guess I'm going back into education. And then, the rest is history. But I quit my job and applied to graduate school and ended up going into the education field from there. And I was 30. So at that point, I had already done public relations, banking, a bunch of jobs, waiting tables, internships, right, and getting paid. I had really hustled my way to that moment. And so I kind of felt like, how could you leave this safe corporate banking job, which that's, that's your safety, that's your security. And it just felt like I had no other choice.
Do you feel like education was always very close to your heart, and that book just reconnected you to that to that passion that you had?
Yeah, well, I feel like that book was all about finding your North Star, right? And so for me, that was my North Star, which I knew. I remember being in DC and thinking like, oh, I really want to try and help create a better education system based on my own experience of, not having a great K through 12 experience, but then having a great college experience. I loved being at community college. I loved UC Berkeley. It just completely changed my whole life. And so I felt like I wanted to help kids like me have more opportunities. And I just didn't know what that looked like. So I was very passionate about education, but I didn't know how to make a living out of it. And then I also felt like the narrative of, teachers don't make any money. So I was kind of like, I don't want to be poor my whole life. I've already been poor, and I don't want to, I have this great degree. I want to actually start going and making money. But when I did that, I realized that I was actually ill. And this is what I want everyone to hear. You get signs multiple times in a day about what your intuition is telling you to do. And so we just ignore them until it gets really, really serious. And then we start paying attention. So for me, it was just being so ill every day. And then eventually actually paying attention to what, the universe was slapping me upside the head and like, go read this book. And that was the book that just said, okay, this is what I've always known. And now I have to go for it.
I love that. So you think that we get guided every single day, multiple times a
Absolutely.
day?
Absolutely. No doubt in my mind. Yeah.
That's
No doubt in my
amazing.
heart.
Yeah.
It's a lot of doubts in my mind, but no doubts in my heart.
Yeah. Can you give an example of what that looked like for you when you were in banking?
Yeah, it was, I'm sitting there and I am not happy. And I remember I had this great boss, and I'm like a pretty nice guy and I don't have a lot of anger issues. I'm very even keeled. And I just lashed out at the guy. I just started yelling and screaming at him. So that's kind of an extreme example, because I didn't even realize I was so unhappy. And then just multiple other examples of, feeling sick every day, not wanting to go to work, just feeling kind of like this heaviness in my body. I mean, there's so many examples, but it really felt like this was the conventional path I was supposed to be following. And I started getting, my wife and I had just gotten married. So I started getting all the kind of clues from the outside world that I was on the right track, right? The older gentlemen in the bank were like, oh, you just got married. I remember that, 32 years ago, this is, so you got all these clues that the conventional path was the safe path and that's what you should do. And those were the rational kind of, intellectual clues, but my heart was telling a whole different story. And it took me a long time to start following that. I have these like moments where I followed it big time because it got so bad. And then, working with Shafali and different things, I started to realize how to do it every day.
But it also takes a lot of courage. I mean, it's one thing that you have an intuition, you have a feeling, I should be doing something different. And then I wonder what tips the scale when you're like, enough, or is it actually a sign, or maybe that book was a sign, but it's just, you need the courage to actually follow through, I think, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like that's kind of the dance of the masculine and the feminine. And so being a man, like obviously I have a lot of masculine energy conditioned into me, but I also had this very powerful feminine energy that was really latent for a long time. And so I feel like I would ignore the intuition or kind of that feminine truth. But I had this masculine energy of like, let's do it, let's go, right? I'm going to put myself through college. I left my house when I was 17. I had all of these, like this real action oriented energy, but it was a lot of times it was directed in the wrong way, right? Like going and getting the corporate banking job, that felt like that was supposed to be the right thing, but it was, the heart was telling me it wasn't the right thing. But I could go and do that masculine energy. So I've never had a problem with the courage piece, because like I said, I grew up in poverty, a lot of trauma, a lot of issues. I kind of became my own parent. And so I was like, oh, this is easy. Like I can do any of this stuff. But it was like putting the two together and really getting clear on, like you said, having the courage to act, even if it's just the smallest thing. Those are big examples, but just what are the small things that you're ignoring maybe every day that you feel like you could just act on?
Yeah. So you basically started teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point you weren't thinking about setting up schools. So what made you
Yeah.
think of that?
Well, it's interesting when I even when I applied to work in education, I didn't apply for any teaching programs. Most of the schools I applied to were education policy master's degrees because I couldn't imagine going back into a classroom because I was so traumatized from my own experience and just the short time I did it. And so I applied to 5 schools, and the Stanford program actually had a master's in education and a teaching certification. So you could get you can get a job after school. And I felt like I'd studied history and I didn't have a job for a few years, and I was waiting tables, and I just felt like I wanted a more practical degree. So that was one of the reasons I chose Stanford. But I remember student teaching the first summer because it was a 1-year master's and you started in June and it was like June to June. And I was like, what am I doing here? What am I doing working with teenagers? Like I was just in Washington, D.C. And I kept thinking that this was so terrible. And then within like 2 or 3 weeks, I absolutely fell in love with it. And I realized, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I just absolutely fell in love with teaching and just the art and science of teaching the kids, all of the things you hear a teacher say, right? When the kid gets it and when you build those deep relationships, and it's the best career ever, even though it's really hard. And I found a charter school that I started in Oakland Public Schools, which is a very urban district, and that was really hard. And so my friend from Stanford had worked at a charter school and they were just starting out. And so I got a job over there, and that's when things really took off because we started with one school at the back of a parking lot, like in these modular, portable classrooms. And then 9 years later, I had helped them open 8 schools. I had gone from a teacher to a principal to assistant superintendent. So it was a really awesome opportunity where, because I was following the path that I was supposed to be on, or the path that was more of like my destiny, it's like the doors just start opening so quickly. I was just so happy when I was teaching. I was literally a completely different person. And and then all of a sudden, we had this internal leadership program because we were growing so fast. And then it's like, hey, do you want to open school number 3? Okay. Do you want to open school number 4? Hey, do you want to train all the principals to open schools 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8? I was like, sure. And all these things just started opening up for me. And I made really good money. The whole concern about not making money also never actually materialized. So all the kind of mind-based worries that I had created in my, the narratives we created in our head, none of them actually came true.
So we were just, before the recording started, we were talking about your spiritual awakening. So at what point did that occur? Was it while the schools were opening? Was it before? Was it after?
It was after. So I think I had some, again, like there's this kind of drastic story at 30 where I quit my job at the bank. And then there's another kind of big moment when I was turning 40. And apparently this is normal, like these decade markers. But when I was 40, I had been with that charter organization, which I really loved it so much. And then when we got to the point where we were 8 schools and I was working, my job was literally driving across the San Francisco Bay Area for, every day, all day. I was on the phone. My kids at that point were 1 and 3. And I would leave the house at 7 a.m. and get home at 7 or 8 p.m. So I didn't really see them. I was always driving. I was always on the phone. And it was like every single problem was rolled up to me, right? So whatever problem the principals had, they called me. And it was really, really stressful. And so I started to have all these health issues. And I had like back problems. And once again, like the body keeps score, right? I think there's a great book that has that title. And I ended up taking a vacation in summer when my son was like 2 years old at that point. And I was sitting with him in Lake Tahoe, and we were about to go hiking, and he fell asleep. So I was like, I'll just sit with him. You guys go ahead and go in front. And I sat down, I had him in my arms. I'm like up in this mountain. It's like this beautiful day in Lake Tahoe. And I literally just had this message that said, you're quitting your job and you're starting your own school. Like you're just starting over. And so I followed it, and I quit my job again and went from the executive that had worked all the way up to basically sitting down with moms and saying like, hey, do you want to enroll in this school? But right after I did that, I was so exhausted from those 9 years in the Bay Area of just hustle, 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 grind, that my body shut down. And then I opened that school. The last week of the first year of the school, I got Bell's palsy, which is like this facial paralysis where your face just kind of like droops and it's paralyzed on one side. And I could not close my eye. My wife thought I was having a stroke, and I saw the look in her eye of like, this could be it. I have, 2 and 4-year-old at home, and I could be raising the kids by myself. So that was a big wake up call. And not surprisingly, I had started the Shefali course like 3 months before that. So I started that in February, and I had the breakdown in June. So it's at 4 months, 3 months.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So then what happened?
So it's kind of like Bell's palsy is, people think it's just like the droopy face, but it's actually, I don't know if this was part of the awakening or if this is normal for the disease, but I couldn't really do anything for like 6 months. It's like mono. I was just asleep. I could not get out of bed. I was just so tired. I was exhausted. But I really think what was happening was I was making up for all those years of my nervous system was on overdrive. Since I was 8 years old, since the trauma really started happening, it was like I never could relax. I was always just worried about safety and security and the next thing happening and whether I could pay the bills. And so it was like once I started to get in touch with that authentic self, the essential, real self that Shefali helped wake up in me, it was like I couldn't do it anymore. So I just put myself to bed. Literally, the universe put me to bed for, it was like 4 or 5, 6 months, and I took a leave of absence from the school. And I had a principal working at the school, so she was able to run the day-to-day, but I took a break from the school. And then within like, I want to say a year and a half, I had left the school and I had started doing consulting and life coaching and completely changed my whole entire trajectory for about 5 years after that experience. Well, I mean, it's my life has changed ever since then, but in terms of what I was doing professionally, my life changed too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with our nervous system. You said since you were 8, you were in this default mode, and I think
Yep.
it's fascinating because when we're in a like fight flight response for our whole life, it becomes what we know, and so it
Yeah.
really, I feel like, takes even in your story, your body sends a very loud signal that this isn't normal. And so it
Yes.
takes a level of really listening deeply and realizing that what we've been conditioned and used to isn't always the best for us. So I can certainly relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, when I really started digging in on the nervous system and Mass and Kip and some of these other folks that talk about trauma and the nervous system, I really started to understand, whoa, I'm like the poster child here of really, really just living my whole life in fight or flight, no safety, and not no, but little safety as a child. So it was like, always had to be the parent. So I never felt safe until literally, I mean, I started the Shefali course 6 years ago, a little more than 6 years ago. And so it's taken me that long to actually, I remember Shefali saying, if you could spend 80% of your time kind of consciously awake and in the present moment versus the, maybe 20/80, she would always say 80%, like your life will never be the same. And that's, I feel like where I'm living now is I'm not, my nervous system's not on overdrive that often. And if it starts to go into overdrive, I like notice it right away. And I do all my strategies and my tools and everything to make sure that I don't live that life anymore. And I'm always in fear that I'm going to go back to that life. Like, oh, geez, right? Like my inner child's always like, don't do it again. Please don't make us go back there. And then I just take a breath. I'm like, okay, we're fine.
But it seems like that, since I've known you, just you keep changing what you're doing. It's always in the same, area, but it's almost like you get a vision or an intuition or something, and then you just open the door for the universe and you just let it happen. And it's like, I've been watching this for 2 years at this point, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually did say to David before that he's like the king of manifestation. But I think it's really something that all of us can learn, because I don't know if can you learn that, because it seems like it's coming so naturally to you, but maybe it's something you've learned through the awakening and all this spiritual work. But I know, I told you I have a very hard time with just opening the door and letting it happen.
I've
Yeah.
been noticing, and sorry to cut you off, because
No,
when
that's fine.
you're asking that question, what comes to mind, what I'm noticing in myself these days is this level of having to trust myself.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, this theme of trust is really prevalent for me right now. So I'd be curious, David, if you can also add to that a little bit as well.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, Anita, I was really thinking about, I remember that I used to tell this story. So for about 3 years, my friend and I that I met in Year of Manifestation, Stacy Lewinsky, we did a program called the Inner Sangha, and it kind of is what got us through the pandemic, but it was an online program, and we had, I think, 4 cohorts of about 10 or 12 people, and we would talk a lot about what it means to actually trust, and what what it means to really let go. And I think when I heard you talking, Anita, I was thinking about, I remember telling the story that I used to have my 8-year-old wounded inner child driving the car. This was my metaphor, my kind of visual that I would share with the group all the time. I was, nervous system, fight or flight, overdrive. That scared little boy was driving the car. And so how is he going to drive the car? Like, not sure, like, oh my gosh, like everything has to be safe. And then as I went through that process of really switching the default, like we talked about from the 80 to 20, or just really switching the default, I then really fell in love with my divine inner child, the 5-year-old version of me. And so that version of you is super playful, does not care about outcomes, does not care about whether you changed your mind yesterday and and you were going to do this and 3 months ago. So when Anita was talking, I was like, oh, that's because I handed the keys to him. And so now we're just playing and we're having a great time. And I'm not scared and worried. And, the 8-year-olds, what I talk about is the car analogy is the 8-year-old, my 14-year-old, and my 18-year-old. It took me a while to realize that your 18-year-old also, for me, also needed a lot of care, because I'm like, that's not a child. But so the 8-year-old, the 14-year-old, and the 18-year-old, we did so much healing together. And so I was able to hand the keys to the 5-year-old because those other 3, and then adult David, were all able to fit in the car. I'm thinking like a mid-size, right? 5 people. So we could all fit in the car. And we were like, it's cool. Let's hand the car over to the 5-year-old because we're here to make sure he doesn't drive it off a cliff or do anything too crazy. But instead of having him in the back, just wishing that we'd give him attention because he has all the creative ideas and he's the free flowing, direct channel to the source. Like, he's the one that should be driving the car. So once I made that choice to really switch my mindset and say that divine child will be driving, then it's like, yeah, I have 5,000 ideas a day. And like I said, I like to execute. And so it changes and it morphs, but it's always trusting, back to your question, trusting the intuition, trusting the energy, and trusting the divine child, and trusting the messages, and just following them a little bit at a time, and it's like doing something as simple. Every time I meditate, I put little things on Post-it notes, and then I put it on my wall. And you start to see after like 2 weeks of meditation, it's like, oh, I see how that fits. I see how that fits. And I'm like, oh, okay. Now I'll sit back and just, surrender and ask for any guidance, and then it'll come. And in terms of like being the manifestation guy, as Anita calls me, I don't think of myself that way because I'm never intentionally trying to manifest anything, but I'm always following the signs and releasing the attachment. So it's that line, be open to everything and attached to nothing. So I'm open to everything, but I'm always working on not being attached to any of the outcomes, because the outcomes is where things start to get tricky. And then the ego will take over and play some games with you, and you'll get really obsessed with and then you'll manifest that, right? Manifestation is not just the positive. It's just a reflection of your inner state. So if you're really worried about an outcome, you're going to get that exact worry that you're looking for as an outcome.
David, what are some ways that you connect to your inner 5-year-old on a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, I think it was part of the unlearning process and part of I think it's the unlearning process of, meditation. Like Shefali would always say, you need to meditate daily. Like if you're going to be in this course with us, you have to do that. You have to commit to that. So doing that, and through that meditation practice, I have just developed tools to check in with the inner child. It's really, to me, I did another course with a great teacher. Her name's Belinda Womack, and she talked a lot about the divine child and the wounded child. And I think Shefali talked about that, but it didn't resonate. She didn't use the same language. And so every single day in my meditation, I'm checking in with the wounded child and the divine child every single day. And it's not intentional anymore. It's just something I do subconsciously. It's just kind of like asking. And if I notice that there's something that feels, worried or scared, then I'll check in with the wounded child. And if I notice there's something really exciting, so I just it's all just subconscious. I think I've just changed the default, but it started with regular meditation and then following different processes that you can get from, Gabor Mate or fill in the blank, different processes, Shefali. I think I followed different people than I did 3 or 4 years ago. So I don't even know what Gabor Mate's processes are, but you find somebody who has a process that you really like, and you use that process whenever you need to, and so for me, I have another teacher that I follow named Aaron Apke, and he does the Catalyst Journal. And you go through a process of trying to figure out what is the catalyst, what is the trigger, and I can like nail it really quickly. It's just like boom, boom, boom. It's always the root one for me is always abandonment and abuse. I'm always scared to death of being abandoned or abused because that's what happened to my 8-year-old self, right? So I know that that's the fear, and I always just don't push it away, but just bring it closer and just ask what it needs. If you could say something, what would you say? I ask the 8-year-old wounded child all the time, if you could say something, what do you want to say, in the meditation? And I'll get really, really clear messages like, I'm scared. I'm worried we're going to have that happen again. And once I get clear on that, then the energy moves and we're good to go.
I just find it amazing because I guess it never really hit me until now. So maybe you should be teaching this. I always kind of thought, your inner child, my little inner child, my wounded inner, like I never pictured it at different ages. Like, I don't know, Janetta, if you may have, but I know I've never, like, until just now, I'm sitting here, I'm like, wow, I guess I never even thought of that. And that is just so cool because it is very true when you said, and interestingly, of course, your divine child is the youngest one before, your authenticity was killed out of you, right? For
Exactly.
a couple of years. And so that is really where we all want to be. And then later on, different ages is when all the problems happen and all the traumas came, and those have different needs than the divine child. And I never really thought of that. So thank you for that. I'll be sitting with that for a while.
Well, that's why we started the Inner Sangha, and we didn't realize that I went to a training. So one of the social emotional learning program that my school uses, we went to a training at this like retreat in Colorado, and I'm sitting here thinking, this is everything I'm teaching in the Inner Sangha. And I had no idea that it's actually a very well-known program called Internal Family Systems. You guys have probably heard about it, right? I don't know anything about it other than that I saw it quoted all over this curriculum. And I'm like, oh, I've already done this without even, again, it wasn't the head, it was the heart. It was all coming just kind of guided and channeled. And so we actually spent a lot of time in Inner Sangha going through your different Inner Sangha members throughout your childhood. So we would spend it was like a 6-month program. The first 2 months would just be about getting to know those different ages. So as we did that with each other, then we brought it and we taught it to other people. But yeah, it's really fascinating. Like I said, I had ignored the 18-year-old version of me for so long. And then one day I realized, oh, I got to really spend some time healing that part of me too.
I love that. I read that book years and years ago. So I understand it from a very intellectual level, but I love that what you did is actually really get to know those parts.
Yes.
Yeah, because to Nita's point, I think that we talk about one inner child when really there's so many rifts that many of us go through where, where we sort of have perhaps life-changing or altering things that might really affect us in different ways. And I love connecting to that younger inner child as well, because again, I think when we talk about inner child, we assume that the adult version of us knows better, but reconnecting to a younger part that has that full authenticity, I think is really refreshing, and it's something that isn't often discussed. So thanks for bringing that up, David. I love that.
Yeah, of course.
So I have a million questions, but I was thinking maybe we can talk about a little bit, conscious education and how your schools are different and what you're working on right now. I mean, you're doing so many exciting things that, I want your life.
It's so fascinating because as we were sharing, when you had asked me the timeline and everything, I had actually opened the school that's in year 9, the K-8 that I have here in Sacramento. I had opened that school and designed it before my awakening, which is really painful because it's like, I've heard people say like writing books is really hard when you're going through this process because you change so drastically from like 1 to 5, 5-10 years. And it's really hard to go back and read your book from 5 years ago. But I created the school before I had my awakening. And as a result, like I'm regularly thinking, gosh, if I could have just changed this or done this, but I had actually left the school. So I couldn't change much at that point. But I'm telling this part of the story because I had a knowing that the school had to be different. And I did create a very different school. It's very much what now I'm learning the term is called a love-based school. So it's all about creating, like, the heart of the curriculum is really helping the kids find their heart, and that they're well loved. Now that's where I stopped back then, and that was like very revolutionary for Mr. Male David back then. I felt like that was like a big push because I had come from a very academic. We were the schools I worked at, the charter school organization. We were ranked number 10 in California and number 50 in the US, right? And so we had really good test scores, and we had high AP pass rates for all kids. Every single kid took AP. So we had 50% of our kids low income taking AP passes and 80% of them getting a 3 or better, which put us in Newsweek, right? Very impressive. Open access, because every other school you look at, that's not an open access. And that's why they're getting those scores. So we were able to get those scores with every kid in the building taking AP classes. Everybody took them and took the test. So anyway, I tell all that because I had come from that environment, but something told me that I needed to move to a much more kind of social emotional learning. At that time, social emotional learning was having its heyday. It was like the new thing. Everybody, not new, but it felt like, it was kind of buzzing. And so that's why I created the school with that at the center. But what I'm doing is getting a little more direct and revolutionary with my schools, and really thinking about how do we create a curriculum where we teach kids that they know the way, that their heart and their intuition is already loaded and coded within them, and they are the experts, and they understand, and they're empowered. And it's really about teaching them how to trust themselves. That's what it says on my website. That's my motto is, I hope that anytime I spend with anybody, the time you're done with me, that you fully understand and know how to trust yourself, and yourself with a capital S, right? Not the egoic self, but the authentic divine part of you that really knows the truth. So why don't we start that with kids, since we can learn from them, instead of creating environments where we're telling them everything, but in fact they're teaching us. So that's my new project with Changemaker Schools, is to create micro schools across the country that are based on that model and that philosophy, and helping build those schools across the world is the vision.
So how's that going to work? So anybody can just go there and we want to start a school, and you give them the soup to nuts and all that stuff? Is
Well,
that
it's so fascinating because when you meet amazing people and talk about a manifestation. So this lady in New Jersey called me like 2 years ago, and I told her, I don't want to help people start schools. I'm all about this spiritual coaching, and I'm tired of education. It's so unconscious, and I can't even be around these people anymore. It was just too much for me. The mirrors were too much. And so I was like, I'm taking a break. But then I got to know this lady. This is Anita, obviously. And I was like, she's so amazing. I guess I'll do it with her. And so you helped me wake up that part of me that wanted to do this. And this is how it works, right? Like, we don't even know yet. Like 2 years ago, it seemed crazy that I would be coaching somebody like you, Anita, right? It's like, that's not what I'm doing right now. But I did tell people over and over again, they kept saying, when are you going to do something about education? And I always said, when it's time. And I remember Shafali telling the story forever about how for 7 years, people were telling her to start a coaching institute, right? And it took her 7 years to actually go through with it. So that's how I felt about the education piece. I was like, the day is going to come, and I'm going to know, and I'm going to go. And so I feel like the time is here. And so I have one program that is helping people open whatever type of school they'd like to open. And that's what you helped me figure out, Anita, over the last, I've been telling you for like 6-9 months now, oh, we're starting it. And it's kind of just slowly but surely. We just finished the website, and we're literally launching it this week. It's called Pathfinder. And it's with a friend of mine who started a micro school that I found. She was in the Inner Sangha with us, and she started a micro school in rural South Dakota, right outside of the Native American reservation she grew up on. So it's super exciting. She's getting a lot of interesting people coming to do research, and she's doing really great work. And so we partnered together to help people open a micro school, which is anywhere from 10 to 150 kids. So you could go and open a school with 10 kids at the church down the street. And that's how easy it is now to start a micro school. Or you could get a little more advanced and complex with your model and maybe have 100 or 200 kids. But either way, we'll help you open it. And then as that evolved, and a year ago, I thought that was the project. And then as that evolved, I had this is actually perfect to what you were talking about, Anita. It's almost crazy to say it logically because it doesn't make sense. But so that was going on, and I was really focusing on that. And then through that process, because it's about the process, not the outcome, through that process, I started thinking, oh, I think I'm supposed to open a high school. So then I started playing around with opening a high school because our eighth graders are graduating 1 year from today in my current school. So I was like, I should really get a high school in Sacramento. And then as I went through that process, I was like, I can't do another charter high school because there's too many regulations and they'll never let me do the things I want to do. And so I thought I'll do some version of a private school, but I want to make it accessible to a lot of kids. I don't want to make it too expensive. And as I went through that process, I just somehow ended up where I am today, which is I have an advisory board and we're working on a program to create like a model that could be used across the world, across the country, that people can take and use anywhere in their community. And that's what Changemaker Schools is. And that just evolved in the last 3 months. And I did not try and do that. It was literally just letting go, asking how I could, how I could serve today. What is my purpose? What's the word I'm looking for? How can I serve today? What is that you want me to do today? Right. And here we are 3 months later, putting together this company that I didn't even expect to be happening 3 months ago.
In the high school, you plan to have the same philosophy?
Okay, so the high school is now like longer in the future because through the process of thinking about the high school, I realized that I'm actually starting a K-6. And then here's a really interesting twist. It's not in Sacramento, it's going to be in Phoenix.
Okay.
I haven't told you this yet.
No, I know you haven't.
Because Arizona has the most, what do you want to call it? The best way to fund a private school with public dollars. So Arizona has it's called an empowerment savings account. There's kind of a movement to create these, they used to be called vouchers, but that kind of has a whole connotation. So now they're changing the name. But the idea is that people can get money from the government to pay for their kids to go to not a public school, to a private school. So Arizona is kind of on the forefront. And they now have families getting an average of $7,000 to put their kids in any school they want, or to do other extracurricular, any kind of educational activity. You can get up to $7,000. And so as I went through this process over the last 3 months about what, again, not trying to figure it out, just sitting back and asking where I go, it just hit me one day. I was like, oh, it's Phoenix, because you got to start where it makes the most sense. That's where the money is, and that's most in line with your vision. So we're going to start the first one in Phoenix 1 year from today, and then it's going to grow into a high school over the next 3 years. And then we're going to create a hub that allows people to take the different version of the school and open one in their community.
So do you find that not pushing the academics, I mean, I may know the answer to that, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Yeah, no problem.
Not pushing the academics so hard is still allowing them, or even more so allowing these kids to learn, because they get to, they're free to learn.
Absolutely. It's taken me a while to come around that because it's like, I remember one time Richard Branson said the best innovators are the ones that don't know too much about an industry, but they know enough to not do a lot of damage. But being a career educator, it's just really hard for me not to see that, to think, well, you have to do, traditional reading, you have to really focus on academics in order for the kids to do well. But I've really changed my tune on that over the last few years, because I've met so many people that were in these amazing schools, or that were
You met Peter Gray.
My wife's cousin, who is like this brilliant woman who was homeschooled. And, it's like, there's so many examples now of like, I knew them, but I just kind of ignored them. And so now that I'm open to them, I'm seeing them everywhere. And I feel like once we start to open up that type of learning, and we start to take the shackles off of the kids, and we stop doing education that was created in 1890, that we'll start seeing a lot of success. There's stories like Saguna Mitra in India. He put a computer in a hole in a village, and these kids taught themselves everything just from having YouTube, right? In like a very poor village in rural India. And so there's just more and more examples of that when you start to pay attention, that I really do believe that's going to, changing the system is going to, and the kids are so ready. They're so awake, they're so enlightened, and the new earth is here, and they're ready. And so we got to get they're not going to let us do it the way we've been doing it. It's not going to last forever. It's just a matter of time. It's if not when.
Yeah,
I mean,
when
not if. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that self-learning model. So I had done some research for Anita around the Sudbury model, and with that I guess Peter Gray is associated to. What I'm finding is that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. So what you're saying is there's a lot of success stories, and but there's not a lot of quantitative data around it. And
Yep.
I was going to ask you whether you do find yourself having to make arguments for shifting from these very academic settings where kids are getting great test scores and you've ranked, very high, your Newsweek, and then having to shift to something where there isn't a ton of evidence, but you heartheartedly believe that is the way forward. Do you find that being a challenge too, or?
Yeah, and I think it starts internally, right? It's so, like I was just articulating, it's really it's been an internal struggle for me, to go tell my charter school friends, oh, I'm not going to have, the scope and sequence curriculum that's tied to every single state standard and all the things we did to really create high academic results. And so there's an internal struggle of like, are you still a good person? Are you still worthy? Mm-hmm. And that's the 8-year-old, right? That's the scared, like, I have to follow the conventional path. Like, you can't change a system. You have to work within the system. Then my 5-year-old chimes in and he's like, hey, you've done like multiple life regressions and you understand your role on this planet. And it is to be a change maker. It's to shake shit up. It's to change systems. And so what you're going to have to do is what we're going to have to do, the 5-year-old, let's go, let's start, let's have some fun now. If you could just get rid of the fear, we're going to have some fun. And it's like, okay, what you have to do is you have to create a new paradigm. And by creating a new paradigm, you create new evidence and you start to change the story, right? You start to change the narrative and you have the quantitative evidence, right? And so when I was starting my last school, my board chair, who's very entrepreneurial, would always say, you have to change what you're measuring because you don't want to use test scores to measure your success. You want to find other things to measure your success. So, it's not as easy to use a standardized test score. That's the most efficient thing. That's why we do that. But there are other ways to measure success. And to your point, how do you do that quantitatively? And my belief is that, I always am good at finding a lot of smart people. And it's like, let's get together and figure out what the quantitative data is to make our argument and show people that this is the new paradigm. And the old world is going to continue to push back against the new world. And we have to figure out ways to change the conversation and show them that this is the way of the future. That said, it always starts with the heart, and then the head will follow. So my heart already knows it's true. So now I just have to figure out how to get the head to convince other people, because that's part of the world we live in, right?
Yeah, it's almost like that 5-year-old knows it's true, right?
Yes.
How do you convince that adult part now?
Yes. And even my adult self knows it's true, but it's like, how do I convince the other adults? It's a little bit of convincing the adult self, I'm being honest. And how do I convince the other adults that are going to really disagree with everything I say? And that's been really, really hard for me because I'm a people pleaser, right? So I have this authentic self that wants to really shake stuff up and be a paradigm shifter and a change maker. But then I have the nice, scared David that's like, well, if you say that to them, they might leave you and you're going to be abandoned. You're going to be alone at home like you were when you were 8 years old. And you can't disagree with that. Mom will leave. And so it's like, I really have to work with that energy of, well, you can say things that are controversial. And if they're not going to leave, they're not going to leave. And if they do leave, it's probably for the right reason, right?
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about that, we have a target, right? The people that we are going to be able to convince, so to speak, but the majority of the people are still not in that headspace. It's going to take a while, and it's like traditional parenting versus conscious parenting, right?
Absolutely.
And it's the same thing with traditional education versus conscious education. And you just what do we say to people who are traditional parents sitting in traditional education? Is there anything we can say at this point, or just kind of forge forward with what we're doing, and then eventually they will catch on. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
It's an inner game. Everything's an inner game, right? And so as you get more and more clear and more emboldened within yourself to what you believe, and again, if you're following your heart, like I was saying, I didn't realize 3 months ago that I was starting this company that's, we just put together the vision for the board, and it's like we're talking about 500 schools in the next 5 years and 1,000 schools in 10 years. These, they're smaller. It sounds like a lot of schools, but that just came through too. I was like, it's supposed to be 1,000 schools in 10 years. And I didn't know that was going to happen, but my heart really does know that it's going to happen. And so I feel like it's, when you're trying to be the trailblazer, you're going to have to deal with a lot of people that are disagreeing with you. And when you're trying to start something new, you're going to have a lot of people that are disagreeing with you. And you're, like you were saying, I mean, if Shefali just decided that conscious parenting was too controversial, none of us would be sitting here. It's so she had some sort of knowing that told her, okay, this is the way forward, and it's going to be controversial and not everyone's going to agree, but I feel like this is what I believe in, and this is what I'm going to stand for.
Yeah, and I mean, you told me many times, right, that I just have to have that certainty, and if people don't want to be on board with me, then they don't have to be on board with me. But when when the people that actually come on board, they will stick with me, and that's really the goal. But I guess we're back to that circle that we talked about at the beginning with Janetta, right? That it's you have to have that certainty inside that that it's going to happen, and you have to have that trust. And I think most of us struggle with that. So you're really
well, absolutely, you have to have the trust that something is going to happen. And I think where we get tripped up, because I was thinking, when you had asked me about the manifestation topic, we get tripped up on, like, the law of attraction, for example, says that, you could, I remember Shefali always saying, like, you're not going to manifest a Rolls Royce and a Bentley. Like, that was always her example. But we get tripped up on these kind of like these outcomes that our ego is really wanting, right? And so then we get tripped up on that. And then the spiritual ego starts to like really focus on the Rolls Royce. And then if we don't get a Rolls Royce, but we end up taking a cruise, across the world, then we're really mad. And we spent all this time being mad that we didn't get the Rolls Royce, and we're missing the fact that we're taking a cruise across the world, right? And so I feel like similarly, as you're bringing forth your calling and you're working on becoming the best version of yourself, that if you can just stay out of the outcomes, but just know, like, okay, for you, Anita, some version of this school is coming into the form, right? And so I just have to be open to what is it going to, I don't know what it's going to be exactly, but I know what the values are. I know kind of certain ideas. And then you could be totally surprised. Like, you could get something totally different than what your little pea-sized ego could even imagine, right? And so it's the inner struggle of trying to constantly just discern what is the ego and what is the heart. And when you're staying in the heart and you just keep following that, you know what it feels like. And then that version of like, I didn't realize that was going to happen. I didn't realize that was going to happen. And you're just kind of open and you're trusting, you're really, really trusting. And you have to re-parent your inner child, and you have to change the default so that the trust changes. Because right now we're conditioned to believe that, if you don't have a plan and you're not doing it from the intellect, that it's not going to work and you're going to fail. So that's deep in our subconscious. So, I've spent the last 6 years really, not even on purpose, but basically focusing on, because my heart has been focusing and my intuition on really rewiring the brain so that I know, okay, I have no idea where this thing's going to be in 3 months. Now I'll write a roadmap. Like, I always have roadmaps because that just helps my logical brain kind of relax, and the 8-year-old kind of just be a little, a little calmer. But like, I have a roadmap for where I'm going in the next 12 months, but it's a high level roadmap. And so it's like going on a road trip, right? It's like, we're going to end up in Vegas in 6 weeks, but we don't know how we're going to get there. It could change.
But you also allow yourself to dream big.
Yeah, I do.
Because that you have that in your heart, and then you don't let the head and all the obstacles get in the way. I guess that's the
and that's that like limited ego, right? This is where I've always been a little bit like unsure about some of the manifestation stuff is out there, defining what it is that you want, because so much of that comes from the head. And
Mhm.
it feels like, well, you know, the higher power of the universe, what does that want for me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and David, I love this conversation. I feel like I'm actually going to re-listen to it because you're definitely, it feels like you're speaking to me, even, you know, through your own life experience. So like anytime I'm an immigrant and you know, I've been raised by the survival you know, model, like we
Yeah.
land here and now we have to work, work, work. And I'm still witnessing that in my parents to this day. And at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm trying to shift away from it. So it's very refreshing to hear how where you've ended up and the process. So it's really good. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. It's like unlearning. You know, Anita, you would ask me like, can you learn this? And as you were talking, I'm like, no, you can't. You have to unlearn it. It's just all the unlearning. And it's really, so what we used to talk about in the inner sangha all the time is that your number one, if you can get to the point where all you want is to, you just desire it so much, just to basically be one with, you know, God, universe, creator, whatever you want to call it, whatever you name it, or whatever feels right for you. If you're just like, I just want to be one. I want to be like, that's my desire. My desire is not to manifest this or to have this career or to plan that. It's just to basically convene with oneness. Like we would used to talk about the abide in the beingness. And we would just tell the inner sangha folks, like, just abide in the beingness. And they'd be like, what is that? And it's like, literally go through your day and abide in the beingness. I don't know what that means. Okay, well, then you're going to know what it means. Just have an intention. It's like, I'm going to sit there and stare out the wall. I'm going to meditate for 2 hours. I'm going to meditate for 2 minutes. I'm going to play with my child. It's like you're just abiding in something that's beyond all of this conditioned stuff that's not true. That's just false. And it's just keeping you in that, you know, the survival mode cycle, keeping you safe. And you just start to, things just start to really open up for you. And that's where the rewiring starts to happen. And then things just start to, manifestation is, it's not even something you'll think about, because everything is a reflection of your inner state, right? So if your inner state is peace, love, abiding in the beingness all day, every day, you turn around and you're like, oh, that's beautiful, that's beautiful, that's beautiful, that person's great, you know. And then when the trigger comes, the catalyst comes, you're like, thank you, okay, this is something that's distorted within me, this is something that needs attention and love, and so thank you for being my mirror. Now I'm gonna work on that, and I'm gonna continue. But even when you're working on that, and this is one of the places where I feel like this is not a criticism of Shefali, but I think because she's a psychologist, you can get my work. My wife has done a lot of work with Suzy Lula, and again, not a criticism. I don't want people to get mad at me, but I feel like as you're on this journey, that you can get so into the, and this could be because I'm a man, you could get so into the kind of psychological deconstruction that you kind of get stuck on that, right? You get stuck on that, and you're going through, you know, 6 weeks of trying to, or 6 months or 6 years of trying to deconstruct this one trigger you had. And the masculine version of me is like, that could take you, like, you could do that in 6 minutes. Like you could literally just breathe into it, meditate, get clear on it, write it in your journal, talk to your friend, and then you're done. And you're going to keep healing. It's not like it's gone, but it's, you know, you've gone a little bit deeper on that wound. And so sometimes I feel like with the psychological deconstruction that we get really into the conversations and the headiness, and we lose the real heart-based work that we're trying to do on the shadow work.
Yeah, I think we're conditioned to think it's more complex. Right?
Yes, we
It needs to be,
overcomplicate.
it needs to be
Yes.
hard. It needs to, you know, we need to put a lot of work into it. So yeah, I love that reframe of, you know, healing can happen within an instant. It can happen in a second. And again, trusting that, right? I don't know,
Yes.
trust just always, it's coming back to me so often these days. It's like, you know, trusting that you had that healing moment. So instead of
Yes.
revisiting it, it's like, I've moved on. Now let's move forward.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I like the moving forward.
Yeah.
Did you actually ever do a workshop on manifestation, David?
Have I done it, like led one?
Like like a workshop, like a full workshop.
Like I led it, or I've taken one?
No, you led it, of
Oh,
course.
sorry. I was like, because
You
I'm
should be
kind
leading it. That's what I'm asking.
well, I feel like when we did the inner sangha, that was kind of,
Okay.
we didn't really talk about manifestation that much, but I will say, out of the, I think we had about 30 people that did it, and out of those 30, like 20 of them quit their job. Like a couple of them had pretty extreme, like 23 years, the same company, I quit, and we started being like, I don't know if we can handle this. Like as the leaders, we're like, we can't handle what's happening to these people when they're done, when they're through the 6 months. And then we would continue for sometimes for a year. And some of the groups would go on for like, one group went on for like 2 years, but they would quit their jobs and make these really drastic. So I don't know if I've ever led a workshop per se, but I feel like I think I started having an allergic reaction to the word after a couple years, because I felt like it was a way for the spiritual ego to trick you into thinking you're doing spiritual work when really you're just playing around with the ego. And so I stopped thinking about manifestation, and I kind of really felt like I'm not going to worry about manifesting. And then the other really big aha moment I had is that manifestation is not just the positive, because you think that it's like I'm manifesting, I want to manifest a new house, or I want to manifest whatever, and then but you're actually manifesting everything, because everything's a reflection of your inner state. So if you're worrying about, there was a point where I think like 7 of my biggest fears, they all came true in like a 6-month period, but they weren't real fears. They were real fears, but they weren't actual real fears. It wasn't like, getting my leg cut off or getting shot in the head. It was like funny ones, like, I would lose the school so much money or something, and everyone would know. Or it was just that kind of stuff. And then, all of a sudden we had this big problem when I was running the school, and all the parents and everyone found out that I messed up and, lost 100 grand. I don't remember the details, but all those things started coming true.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, everything, you are the creator. You are in charge, not your ego, but the highest version of you is in charge. So if you're spending all day thinking about, I don't think I have enough money, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that, that's what you're going to get. If you're trying to spend time abiding in the beingness, then you're going to quit your job if you realize that that's not the right job for you, right? Because you're like, okay, now I have the courage to do it because I've been sitting here all day convening with the oneness. And so so the manifestation piece to me is, it's a slippery slope for people that are letting the spiritual ego hijack the whole process because it's so easy. But I think it totally works. I think I've never done, like, I bought the I have it on I've had it on my desk forever. It's right here. I bought this one. Have you guys ever seen like Project 369? They got me on Instagram. It's all about manifestation, and it's a workbook, and you write down every day like what you're trying to manifest. You have like monthly goals, and I could never get myself to do it, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't get myself to do it. And I think it's just because I think that's like a good place when you're first kind of going through the awakening process. It's like, it's a good process to go through as you're kind of starting to get like shed and unlearn. And the house I'm sitting in, we manifested this house to the detail. We bought this 5 years ago, so it was like around the time we were doing the Shefali work, and every single detail about the house, we didn't realize it, but we wrote it down because we were just looking at a bunch of houses, and then we're like, oh, this is every single detail we wrote down, even the like vintage toaster, or what do you call it, vintage bread thing, and every single detail. It's like, how is this possible, right? So it totally works.
I think the manifestation stuff gets a lot of people into spirituality, which I think is, can be a good thing, right? But I think what you're also highlighting is that can only get you so far. And I love how you said that you kind of, when you're in that oneness, when you're just looking around, it's not like, I think at the end of the day, it's not the stuff that brings you joy. It's like being at peace and being with oneness, right? So
Absolutely.
like the car will never bring you the level of joy that your heart wants. So
it might temporarily,
yeah.
But it's not going to last.
Yeah.
Like, what is abundance? If you ask yourself what is abundance, it's like, oh, I love that activity. It's like the wind blowing on the in the tree. It's the smile from your child. It's the touch from your best friend. It's like all those beautiful things that are really just a reflection of the formless, as a reflection of the source, and the oneness, the timeless, eternal energy. It's not like we think it's like, oh, having $1 million in the bank account and all this other stuff. But it's like, really, when we actually go underneath it, abundance is not that. We're not going to die and look back at our lives and say like, gosh, I had a really nice Mercedes. I'm so glad I had that Mercedes. That's not really what you're going to be reflecting on in your life, though most of us will. and that's okay because that's their journey. But a lot of us will reflect on like, did I get the house and did I get the nice car? Did I make it? But
Well, I could talk to you forever, but I don't want to take up your entire night. So where do we reach you?
Yeah, it's really easy. Just go to davidkrichards.com.
And that has everything you do and all the
Mhm.
stuff. And you also had a couple of podcasts, so people can listen to that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have more of your wisdom there, a lot of it
Yes.
actually.
Yes, I have a Conscious Way Forward, which I did for a couple years during the pandemic, and then I have my most recent one is a Changemaker EDU, which is all about leadership, school reform, all that fun stuff, micro schools, all that good stuff.
Well, thank you so much. That was
Thank you.
amazing. And I'll be taking notes and writing quotes from you going forward. So
I
thank
love
you
it.
so much.
Thanks for holding the space. You're both amazing, and just I'm really honored to have spent the time with you. So have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.